Let's get started. I will share my screen. Welcome everyone to the December Open Charging Network Developer Call. Chris can't make it today, so I will be hosting. Great. On the call, as usual, we've got myself, Ajan, Amika, and Adam, and I can see Robert and Felix are here as well. Welcome.
Hey, good afternoon.
Hello.
So on to the agenda. Couple items here, and this is flexible. If there's anything else that you'd like to talk about over the hour, we can certainly add that. First, the plan is to talk about the Velocity integration update and then discuss potential of EV fleet integration with the OCN, and then any proposals or issues for discussion. I'd wanted to talk about the OCN Notary History API, which I made an issue for, and then any other QA and a quick wrap up at the end. As I said, yeah, this is flexible and we can certainly add if need be. Okay, so yeah, with that, let's tackle our first item here, the Velocity integration update. Adam, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. Yeah, so I was unable to actually get any information from them, but I can give you an overview of how the integration is going. Yeah, basically, I just wanted some feedback to see how the overall process of integrating with the OCN was for them. They're in like the final stages of doing this. For those of you that don't know, Velocity are a CPO from Canada. So they connected to the test network, I think quite successfully with a OCPI 2.2 API. The next phase for them was to implement OCN signatures. This is where the integration is still ongoing. And I guess it raises a question of, how do we make OCN signatures as easy as possible for people to use, as approachable, especially people coming from the e-mobility world, maybe haven't had much overlap with the blockchain world, and how do we make that easy for them?
Right. So their current state is that they're still integrating the signature component and working through those issues.
Right. And I remember also Felix, we also had issues with the signatures, like if one party perhaps doesn't require signatures, but another party does, how do you need some kind of management of these connections. You need to include the signature in some requests, but not in others. And this can be difficult.
Yeah, I was having signatures and Energy didn't, so, and there was an issue, I think.
So yeah, one proposal could be to just enable signatures globally in the OCN, but then you lose maybe the testing facilities, which is quite nice. For companies implementing OCPI 2.2, they have like a ready implementation here, and they don't need to do anything extra. And they might not be interested in the signature component, but it does lead to issues, as discussed.
Right. We've talked about the importance of signatures previously. yeah, definitely something to consider, whether or not it would be worthwhile making them mandatory on the test network as well, I think is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for that update, Adam. I don't have anything else to add to it. Yeah, I suppose it sounds like we're hoping to have them integrated and within the next few weeks or early in the new year. Is that right?
Right.
Okay, great. I think let's move on then to the second agenda item, which was discussing EV fleet integration with OCN. I'll give just as a quick context statement. The idea is to have a fleet of vehicles that their backend, their MSP backend may not necessarily implement OCPI, but still they could benefit from the OCN functionality. So the idea is how could they potentially use OCN, or how could the OCN accommodate their needs? Is that a fair description of what we're going for, Adam and Mika?
Mm-hmm. I think it would be beneficial if it was not mandatory to implement OCPI in order to be able to send messages, indeed.
Right. The one initial thought that I had around this was potentially, well, we have the OCN bridge library, which allows integration without necessarily implementing OCPI, but there still is some integration effort. Yeah, do you think that would be useful in this context, or not necessarily?
From my understanding, EV fleet, is this a product, or is this just integrating a fleet of EVs?
I take it to mean it's integrating essentially an MSP, more or less.
Because for me, the integration with the OCN without implementing OCPI was more for integrating additional services like settlement, or I don't know, dynamic pricing, things like that, where you will receive a message, you will receive a specific message, and you're listening for the signal of start charging only, and you receive this message and you make some computation and change the response for it. And because this is a one-trick pony, it doesn't really make sense to go to the overhead of implementing OCPI, and you would benefit from having a RESTful interface in this case.
I see. So if I'm understanding correctly, it would be a way for a party to pull data via a RESTful interface for, like, essentially accessing specific OCPI functionality without needing to register with OCPI. Is that right?
Yes, that they would not connect with a token A and token B, but they would connect via another login mechanism, like authentication mechanism, by signing signing a challenge with their private key, for example. And then they are authenticated as being this identity, which is entered in the OCN registry, so they can authenticate, but they don't need to use this OCPI specific method with the tokens. And then they can, yes, participate. Obviously, the OCPI modules would still need to be defined, because else the messages wouldn't make sense to anyone. But you don't need to have the full OCPI implementation, or even implementing the basic modules like version, or I can't remember what the minimum implementation is. But you wouldn't need to implement that. You would just say, okay, I'm interested just in this message, and so I can connect to an OCN node and listen to that, and you would get notified. I don't know, Adam.
Is it particular, like if someone wants to know only the location object, then they can only listen to the location object, not other things? Is it something like that?
Yes, that could also be a use case. So if you you have a search for locations, and then you can listen to that and give an answer. Yep, that might also work. Or Adam, you know better what exactly the use case is, so maybe I'm describing it wrong.
Well, yeah,
I'm a bit unsure.
That's it. So obviously OCPI is still the core of the OCN, and from a data perspective, it would never change, I think. But as we see more services coming onto the OCN, probably, and hopefully, you know, more parties and more use cases will come up in wanting to use the OCN. How do we provide different interfaces to just make the integration as easy as possible? And one possibility then is a RESTful HTTP API, as you mentioned, but it doesn't have to be limited to that, I guess. I'd like to see the OCN become a bit more modular. So OCPI could be one connection point, but you could swap it for whatever is desirable for your backend architecture. Yeah, that was my idea for the future of the OCN.
All right. It sounds to me like we're still in the proposal stage, or gathering use cases or requirements for making changes in this area. So maybe something to revisit as we need to. But I think this was some good initial discussion around it. Is there anything else to add?
Maybe what is required in order to make this change accepted? I mean, do we have a formal change request process, like the Ethereum improvement process or something similar?
Not to my knowledge, no, we don't have anything formal. I think the process, as I would describe it, is submitting an issue on Bitbucket. There's some discussion around it, either on Bitbucket or on a call like this one, and then a pull request is made. But and you're saying maybe a more formal process or a different process would be valuable.
Well, I don't know. I mentioned it because you said that it was still in the process of being, or still in the stage of being, a proposal. So I was wondering what this really meant, because for me, this is the forum where we discuss proposals. So if we all agree that it's a good idea, then we can go ahead and do it.
Yeah, I would agree that we could begin if there were resources to implement, we could certainly begin implementing, in my view.
Mm. Okay. Then, yeah, but I agree with you that some more documentation is required. I would be interested in Robert's point of view. If you see some value in integrating non-MSP or CPO backends that do not speak OCPI and have no knowledge of that world, if this is something you have come across, and
Yeah, no knowledge is a bit tricky because they will need to have some knowledge on the kind of information they're receiving.
mm-hmm.
Quite a common one, of course, is the navigation service provider, where they just want to show where charging stations are, which is a common case to integrate, and they probably also want to show the correct tariff to the driver.
Mm-hmm.
We are looking into integrating, at least if you look at what we are discussing now for OCPI 3.0, 2.3 is adding maybe the DSO. So the grid operator giving him an interface to talk to the CPOs on, hey, I've got a grid congestion somewhere. We want to be able to reduce the load at a certain location. So that's more talking about grid connections and not charging stations. But then still they need to be aware of OCPI, because doing something
Mm-hmm.
that's, because otherwise you need to do some translation and integrate some totally different protocol, which is a bit.
No, obviously you need to be aware of the data model and the format of the data structures that you need to provide to OCPI and that you will get from OCPI in order to be able to process them. But when I say no knowledge of OCPI, it's more in the sense of you don't really care about the members because you don't connect to a specific member. You just provide a service with your customers. Well, if you talk about point of interest for a navigation system,
you don't care which CPO it is. You just want to have as much information as possible.
Exactly.
So that's a typical example that's quite common. Another one, because I was thinking also, like there's always parties you want to connect. There's always discussions that we are having on. Okay, I think one of the discussions I've been having the last 2 months is the split in MSP and even within CPO. So having the difference between a technical and an administrative CPO, and the difference between the technical MSP and a more administrative MSP. Because we are now working for a company that is basically MSP, but they have a separate MSP that provides all the services for them. But the question is if that kind of connection would go over OCN, because that's always a peer-to-peer connection almost. I mean, that's a one-to-one relationship between these two companies where they have a very tight relationship. Otherwise, this won't work. At least for the MSP part, for the CPO, you might run into having 2 or 3 technical CPOs for one administrative CPO. So they might have different, because what happens is the bigger companies tend to buy networks nowadays, and then they have to integrate them. And they have like the role that does all the contracts and all the invoicing, but they don't want to move over all the hardware to its separate server. So they keep the existing servers in place, but they don't do the billing from these anymore. They do them from their own central system. But also that kind of connections, it's not that interesting to put over a hub, I would say at the moment.
So in this case of CPO splitting, Robert, do the technical and admin CPOs both, if they want to make OCPI connections, do they do token exchanges with whoever they want to communicate, or do the technical CPOs somehow leverage the admin CPOs, or they're all separate parties?
Yeah, so there it becomes a question on, okay, are these roles split? Because yeah, there doesn't seem to be one way of doing it. But I think the best way of doing it is that the administrator CPO is the one responsible for authorization. So they will receive the tokens from the MSPs, and they won't send the tokens to the technical CPO. So the administrator CPO is the one keeping the list of tokens or doing the real-time authorization. And then when a OSPP authorization request comes in, the technical CPO will need to ask the administrator CPO, like, hey, this guy wants to charge you. Is that guy allowed to charge at your location? Because the technical CPO seems to be the party that does the maintenance installation only. And in some cases, that's the OEM. That's even the manufacturer of the charging station that runs it and maintains it. And then his customer does all the administrative part. But it also then depends on the split if you use OCPP between the two or you use OCPI between the two, because it's like a gray area a bit on how to do this best. Because you're starting to send CD. What we've seen now in the two cases where we've been helping with implementations, one we did the implementation, the other we did consultancy, is we were sending CDRs from the technical CPO to the administrative CPOs, and those were CDRs with all the data in there, but there was no cost or tariff in there. So we basically sent all the metering information to the administrative CPO, and the administrative CPO then adds the tariff and the cost, and then sends it to the MSP. But I would have said, like, if we end the session, if the technical CPO ends the session, then that session should be enough input for the administrative CPO to generate the CDR, but somehow they decided to do it differently. That's a great area. It's a gray area on how you do that. There are questions to make that better available within OCPI, but then I think that's always a peer-to-peer connection. So the question is how much something like OCN could contribute to that, to making that easier. I think that the navigation service provider is an obvious one. Billing, having some company that provides a certain billing solution might always be an interesting one. Just being able to send over metering data, tariff information to a certain party, and let's get back the running cost. They don't need to know anything on OCPI. They just need to get enough input to be able to do billing.
So you're saying that these relationships are being defined or are defined in OCPI 3.0? Is that what you're saying?
It's on a wish list for OCPI. Technical and administrative splits of the roles that could be in 2.3 even, but I don't know. We're currently really in the early stages of defining. We've got a big wish list, and we have to figure out what do we put in 2.3 and what do we put in 3.0. Because I mean, you know best, it's quite hard to get people to migrate to 2.2. Really pushing in the UK, because we're doing consultancy to a lot of companies in the UK now. It's like, you don't have any legacy. Why would you go to 2.1.1? Go to 2.2 directly. But even that seems to be a struggle, because they're all looking at each other like, what's the other doing? Because I'm not going to do 2.2 if the others are doing 2.1.1. And all looking at each other like, okay, what are we going to do? So I'm trying to convince all talk to each other, and that's just 2.2. And if we're going to do 3.0, we're going to break a couple of the basics from OCPI. That migration would even make them more anxious to migrate. So that's why I think we might end up with a 2.3 in between, just to provide certain functionality that would improve the OCPI enough for the coming years. So we do have time for 3.0 later on. Things like 15.11.8 support. I mean, hopefully by the end of next year, 15.11.8 is mature enough to be rolled out into production in the field. Then OCPI probably needs to be available for that as well. But I have to be honest, I wasn't. As I'm involved with OCP, I wasn't the one that has written the 15.11.8 part of OCP, and I still have to dig into, okay, what would that mean for OCPI? And does it even mean something for OCPI? Because if that's just certificates, the certificate validation maybe. So does OCPI then have a role in the token part at all? But CDRs maybe, and okay, what kind of IDs do we then have in the CDRs? That's so yeah, we will have a 3.0 if you would ask me. And would that contain a technical and administrative CPO? Yeah, as I said, it's a bit of a gray area because it's not that well defined in the market. So we could provide maybe some guidelines on, hey, we as EV Roaming Foundation see this as the best way of doing that kind of split. And if you do it, then do it like this, because then at least everybody does it the same way and it makes it easier. It's quite hard to make a hard rule there because it's not that well. Yeah, it's not that such a hard rule that there's a difference between the two.
All right. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it seems
I'm sorry
seems
that
relevant
I need
to me.
go. I'm sorry to interrupt. I need to go, so I will get back to you later. Okay.
All right, take care.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just saying I think that it could be relevant as I understand the fleet integration a little bit better now. I think perhaps the key is separating the authentication portion of OCPI from the functional portion. And it sounds like perhaps the separation of the admin, CPO, and MSPs is something in that direction. Anything else to add on this item before we move on? Okay, then. So the third item on the agenda was proposals or other issues that we have documented in Bitbucket for discussion. The one that I had noted was the OCN Notary History API. We've talked about it. It has an idea in previous meetings, but it's now a Bitbucket issue. So I just wanted to highlight that and go over what I've put down and see if there's anything that we can add to it during this call. And yeah, take it from there. So let me just go over that. So I have it open here. Yeah, the idea or the motivation is that there could be scenarios where messages are being passed between different parties, potentially a chain of parties, not just from party to node to party back to node. This could be the case in the OCPI service modification of messages functionality that we discussed in previous calls, in the interception of messages. In this chain of parties, it would be useful to know what the history of rewrites or history of transmission has been. And this is available currently in the notary rewrites property, but it may be valuable to have an improved API to make it, I think, easier for services to get access to the history of signatures. So yeah, so that's the use case that I have here is this third-party interception of requests. If there's another use case that comes to your minds, that would be good, I think, as well for helping define the requirements. And then I also was thinking about how to design the API or what it could look like. The one thought that I had was maybe the browser history API, where you would have perhaps a property like or one of the headers. I say the to or from header, and you could scroll through the history of that header, going to the end and the beginning. So that's what I was thinking.
With my first impression was that this is really useful for debugging, especially if there's multiple services looking into a message or rewriting it. I mean, if a message goes out and two services do a rewrite, and then figuring out what went wrong if the end result isn't what you expected. Is this then also very useful for debugging, or is that not?
No, it sounds that would be very useful to me. Yeah.
Because at least what we see a lot is what you're doing a lot is digging into the message itself, like what went wrong here and why is this message like that. If somebody's rewriting, then you probably want to have the ability to figure out, okay, who did what. And as long as there's only one service in between, I think it's quite simple to do that. But as soon as there's multiple services in between, yeah.
The main purpose of this rewrite history is to maintain security. You need to be able to analyze the entire history to make sure that the last signatory is actually allowed to do what they did.
No.
This is the main purpose of this thing. But yes, indeed, I never looked at it with the lens of debugging, but it's also something that could be useful. Indeed, you can tell who rewrote, who made what change, because you have the history.
And there will be bugs in the software always, so it's always good to figure out, okay, who did that and what signature was it, which message ID, and then going to that party and saying, hey, what happened with this message? Was getting unexpected results here, and then they probably need to go into the code and figure out, okay, we got a bug here and we need to fix something.
Right. I think in terms of security, verifying that the overall integrity of the message is unchanged. I think the notary does offer that currently. You can quickly verify, with a single method call in the notary, that the signature and its history is correct. So that API is there. I guess, yeah, this potentially, I think, would be more for, as I see it, scrolling through the history. I mean, you can kind of already do that with the rewrites property, so perhaps this isn't as necessary. I think having it as an implementation detail of the notary, kind of having to dig into the notary, isn't the best situation. So I think that's where there's room for improvement.
So the idea here is to add an explicit function that would allow you to go back in time.
Right.
And you would be able to display the full path in a, I don't know, XML path fashion. So the separated, and then you can say, I want to go 1 or 2 steps back in time.
Yeah, I could see something like that being useful, being able to, display or generate, the path, and then dig into that as desired.
But what would the path look like? Would it be identity of editors, or what would the path elements be?
Yeah, so I think that makes sense to me. You could have the identity of each signer as an element along the path, and then it as a sub information in each element. You could have the headers and body. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what would be most useful, but I like this idea of being able to provide a path in an easy to consume format.
Or would it be enough to create an array, return an array of versions, and then you can simply say, okay, I want version 0 or version 12 or anything in between?
Right. I think that's That's essentially what the rewrites property is, I believe. I think it's an array that in each element of the array has a map of the properties that were changed.
Yes, it's been some time, but I think if I remember correctly, that was the idea. So you have to be able to reconcile the changes in the sense that you must be able to know what has been changed in order to verify the signatures. And so you have this array, but you don't have a path. You cannot say, I want to see the changes of this identity.
Right.
But going to the debugging idea, that might be useful. I want to say, I want to see who fucked up. So I want to see the identity of this, the changes of this identity and the changes of this other identity. Shouldn't be too hard to implement.
Right.
I think, Adam, you're the only one who actually read the code of this implementation, so your opinion might be valuable.
Yeah, the problem we've had when debugging these signatures is you don't know exactly you don't know the exact values which were signed originally. You only have, what is it? It's also been a long time since I looked at it. You have to compare them to what you have now. So you compare the hash of the signed values. You don't have the original values. That's always been the problem. So you have then a history of the rewritten fields, but if you don't have the original values, and it could be something simple like, I don't know, one programming language handles a certain value differently to another programming language. And this takes time to debug and yeah, so, but you can't really encode the original values in the signature. I guess at some point it gets too big and so, yeah, there needs to be a way around this.
I guess the how it would work is you have the final object, and then you would reconstruct what must have been the previous objects using the changes.
I think, yeah, basically
right?
you always need to go back to the signer's environment and see how they signed it. Without that, you're never going to get the full picture because your environment might do things differently. There will always be this necessary debugging.
Now that you're talking about it, I remember, yes, you're right, Adam. Of course, the original data is lost. So you do not get the original data because the thing that is signed is the hash. And this is done in order to reduce size. So we always sign 32 bytes, but the original data is not transmitted. So you don't get the data history, you only get the signature history. And hence it's not possible to go back in time.
Yeah.
You would need to create something like a debug mode that also includes the data. And I think in the first implementation, you did include the data, and then it just exploded in size. And we decided that it doesn't really make sense because the main purpose of this, the rewrite history, is to ensure that the signers are authorized to do what they do. We don't care about the content.
Yeah.
So it's about finding out, oh, this signer has changed this list of attributes, but you don't know from what to what they changed it. Unless you're looking at the latest version of it, in which case you know to what they changed it. But there is no way to find out the original.
This still has value, as John said. We like the verification method of this notary API just checks that it's cryptographically correct.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't check that the response URL in this command's request was changed nefariously. That's a problem. It wouldn't be able to determine that. So it's on the user to be diligent and check this, and I think providing more tools to do that would be beneficial, I guess.
So, okay, so you're saying it's not possible to reconstruct given the final message and what was changed. You still can't reconstruct the original message.
I mean, yeah, that's one problem, which makes debugging very difficult. And then
Right.
there's, I'm a CPO, I received a message from an MSP. In between, the node changed it. Perhaps an OCN service has also modified the request in transit. When I receive it, the request, I have a signature with multiple rewrites. I just call verify on this signature, and it's cryptographically secure. It's correct. But the service that I signed up for is changing data in ways which I didn't expect. Is not part of the agreement I have with that service. I might not know this if I just blindly verify the signature with the notary.
But can you get a list of attributes that have been changed, at least?
Yeah, you can, but it's perhaps hidden away, and it could be easier.
Mm.
How would you make it easier necessarily? Is that what this history API could be then in your view, Adam? Getting that list of what has changed easier?
Yeah, it could be a nicer user experience. Right now, you have to dig into the notary instance, and you just have to be diligent. And I guess some people implementing the notary and OCN signatures might not be so diligent. But then that's on them also. I mean, the data is there ultimately. You just have to find it and know to look for it. So, I mean, there are common fields which must be changed by an OCN node, for example. The OCN node needs to change URLs which point to a backend service which the recipient would not have access to. So it needs to cache response URLs and replace it with its own, which the recipient can read. Likewise, maybe it needs to change recipient headers if it's rerouting messages to different services, something like that. You would not expect a node to change location coordinates. but it could. I mean, someone could modify the node to do that. So the notary might be able to understand that this public key belongs to a node. I see that it's changing a location's coordinates. That shouldn't be allowed. Could be something like that.
So maybe in order to improve the security of the system, what we can definitely do is add some basic verifications. So an OCN node is by default permitted to change these attributes. But an OCN node does not need to be, yes, it needs to be registered in the OCN registry. So you can identify OCN nodes as such.
Yeah. I do wonder if this is necessary, whether there could be a use case where you want to extend the node to handle or to rewrite such things. If you, I mean, I like the idea of a node that has the ability to have plugins targeted for it. If a plugin is trusted by you to change such information on your behalf, then this would obviously fail because perhaps the plugin then is not allowed to actually to change this.
But you could use a different key for the plugin, so that you can recognize the changes that have been done by the plugin and the changes that have been done by the node.
Yeah, true.
Which would still allow a plugin. And in that case, you can also register the plugin's address in a registry and say, this address is permitted to make these changes, and then you can also verify it. And then at least when you use a message or you consume a message that comes from a node that has this plugin installed, you know, oh, that's plugin such and such, it has been registered and it made the changes to these fields, that is okay. Because I trust this kind of plugins. Or it is not okay because I don't trust them and I reject the message.
So I wonder if the notary needs tighter integration to the registry.
Yeah. I think 8 minutes will not be enough to resolve this question.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. Yeah, I'll put some of what we talked about in the this Bitbucket issue, and so we can have it documented and perhaps look at further discussion or implementation after that. All right. Are there any other questions or issues that folks wanted to discuss before we end the call? All right. If not, then have a good day or a good evening wherever you are, and talk to you next month or even perhaps earlier. All right.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Have a good evening.
Bye.
Bye.